All right, it is a Friday night. It's getting a little bit late on Friday, and I'm headed home. It's dark and a little bit gloomy, and a little bit of a noirish feel as the shadow and the light crosses my face as I head east on the Southern State Parkway. Probably my least favorite road because it curves and swerves, but not so much here. More in Long Island, it feels like the Indianapolis 500 as you approach the Queens border. But I wanted to hop on here, and I wanted to discuss a movie that I have discussed several times on the channel, because I feel like there are certain people now who follow me and subscribe to the YouTube channel who haven't heard me talk about this film at length. But either way, I want to kind of approach it from a different angle on today, which is the 39th anniversary of the release date. Now, there are two big movies where this is the 39th anniversary. March 6, 1987, must be said, was a really good day for Hollywood. One of the movies that came out on March 6, 1987, got terrific reviews, was a franchise starter, and a significant box office hit, and furthered the careers of everyone involved, the filmmaker, Richard Donner, and the two great stars, Danny Glover and Mel Gibson. We're talking, of course, about OG Lethal Weapon, which was released March 6th, 1987. Now, the other big movie released March 6th, 1987, was a film that had very strong advance buzz. Now, I don't need to remind you, in the pre-internet era, that was a little bit unusual. It meant that the distributors and or the theater owners and or certain studio executives who would occasionally place blind items in Daily Variety and The Hollywood Reporter would go on record and say stuff like, such and such a movie is supposed to be a home run. It didn't happen as often as you might think. Everybody was nervous. Nobody even now wants to have egg on their face predicting this is the greatest thing ever, and then it comes out and it falls flat. But Sir Alan Parker's Angel Heart opened the same day as Lethal Weapon. And the reason why I know that there was a lot of buzz on this is a real deep dive. When I was at NYU, I spent a lot of time, not surprisingly, at the Bopes Library, which is still there. This was still, the internet existed circa fall 1994, 95, but it's nothing like what it would become a very short time later. So a lot of research was done in dusty shelves with books that had probably not been cracked open in a decade or 2 decades, and it was really a sight to see and to behold. I could still feel the sense of the dust when you would open a book that hadn't been looked at in who knows how many years, how many semesters, till the last time somebody even pulled this off the shelf 10 feet high on the second floor in the section that's supposed to be about the French New Wave, or French Poetic Realism, or Italian Neo-Realism, or German Expressionism, or the New American Cinema, or the New German Cinema, all kinds of stuff. But there was a magazine which was popular at a certain point in time among the intelligentsia, the film geek crowd. People who loved movies and loved the craftsmanship, the technique that goes into motion pictures. The way to describe this difference, it's very simple. My old NYU professor, Joe McElhenney, who I had right around this time, I had him for Color and Cinema in the spring of 1995. We watched Martin Scorsese's The Age of Innocence twice. That's very rare that you're going to screen the same film twice, but that's how important McElhenney thought that Scorsese's arguable masterpiece. I think it might be the best movie he ever made, as much as it's a kind of a difficult and frustrating film. But McElhenney said, there's a difference when one person versus another person interviews a filmmaker about a movie. Could be any movie. He said, Entertainment Weekly has some people who really know their stuff. but they're not going to really ask serious questions about how Martin Scorsese achieved certain shots. What did you do? Was that a swish pan at the 1 hour and 6 minute mark? Was that a rack focus, the scene at the opera? If you're from Entertainment Weekly, you might be able to ask that question. You might intellectually know how to ask that question. But you're going to ask Martin Scorsese, what's it like working with Michelle Pfeiffer? Is she really as beautiful in person as she seems? That's what you're going to ask Martin Scorsese. How much are you hoping that this film is a box office hit? Do you expect this film to be a hit? Was it an easy shoot? Was Daniel Day-Lewis as prepared? Those are the questions Entertainment Weekly would ask. But a magazine such as Film Comment or American Film, which was the magazine that I was just referencing without having named, at least I don't think, they would ask those kinds of questions. This was a magazine for cineasts. They didn't just write, upbeat articles about what movies were coming out. They would go deep into what happened in pre-production of certain films. And there were a couple of articles, short bursts written about Alan Parker's Angel Heart in the months leading up to its release. And if I'm not mistaken, there was one particular quote. I don't know if it was from a studio executive or if it was from a distributor. It could have been from a distributor. But it was wondering why, because the film apparently had been ready for quite some time. They were wondering why they didn't push to release it in time to qualify for the Oscars. Like, that's where people were. We've never seen a movie like this. It feels like a mystery. There are elements of Chinatown, but then it turns into a horror film about halfway through, and there are kind of elements of The Exorcist, and nobody's ever seen a movie like this before. So this magazine that I read these items in, it was over a couple of different issues. The magazine had gone out of print sometime around 1992, and now we're in 95. And when I asked the librarian, why aren't there any more issues of this? I didn't know that this magazine was out of commission. How would I possibly know that? Yeah, now I would look on the internet, but that kind of information wasn't yet available all over the internet. So this librarian said, these magazines, this magazine shut down a couple of years ago. Nobody really looks at them. You're the first person to look at them that I can remember this term. Would you like to take them home? Yes, please. Wow. So I took the magazines home and I read them. I found a lot of other interesting information about, for example, Total Recall, and the fact that David Cronenberg was originally going to do that with Richard Dreyfuss. Man, what a crock that would have been. What a joke, literally. Richard Dreyfuss as Doug Quaid? What? But those were the kinds of things that were in this magazine. So the advance buzz on Angel Heart was really, really strong. Now, I didn't know this in 1987. I'd never heard of the movie. I was 13. What I knew about Angel Heart was people were talking about it, but not for that reason. They were talking about it because when Alan Parker submitted the film to the MPAA, the movie was rated X on the first pass-through. And what that meant was it could be shown in certain theaters, but it couldn't be shown at any national chains unless and until Alan Parker, who was already very well respected. This was not some random guy. This was a guy who was already on his way to knighthood. He had directed Pink Floyd The Wall. He did Midnight Express. He had already done Birdie, a very interesting film with Matthew Modine and I think Nicolas Cage. This was a great filmmaker. Shoot the Moon with Albert Finney and Diane Keaton, a very painful movie about the dissolution of a marriage. When the MPAA told him, we got to give this an X rating, Parker was crushed. He didn't like the idea of having to edit his film. He submitted his cut. This is my movie. And don't tell me that the 10 seconds you're telling me that I need to get rid of to make it an R rating. No, I don't think that this is acceptable. Well, he ended up removing the 10 seconds. Now, the irony is, so that it could get an R rating, the irony, there's multiple ironies, but one of the ironies is the film was never released in the so-called theatrical version. It was never released to home video in the theatrical version. We always got the unrated version. The DVD carried the unrated version, and the VHS carried the unrated version. Now, I'm sure that at some point Alan Parker got a kick out of that, but at the time, he was really hurt, and it ticked him off that they treated him as if he was some porn merchant. Yes, the sex scene is graphic. Yes, it looks like, spoiler alert, it looks like Mickey Rourke and Lisa Bonet, who was on The Cosby Show, and that now is very funny because Bill Cosby supposedly objected to it, and you can make all the jokes you want about that little piece of true history. That Cosby, there were rumors he wanted to get her off the show because she made this movie with this provocative sex scene. Hey, Bill, no offense, but you're really not the person who should be talking about that. No, again, no offense, it doesn't matter, he doesn't care. But Angel Heart came out, and there were some critics, such as Roger Ebert, who gave it a rave review, and David Anson in Newsweek liked it a lot. Bill Harris, who had a program at the time, another program like a Siskel and Ebert, he really liked it, and I'm pretty sure it was Bill Harris who said it's like Chinatown meets The Exorcist. And that is about as good a way to describe this film as you can. But for whatever reason, maybe it was the time, it was the 80s, it was the Reagan era, and for whatever reason, the film just didn't ignite with audiences. People saw it, some people really liked it, but a lot of critics were left cold. There was talk, it's all style and no substance. You know, it's a confusing plot. It's actually not really a confusing plot. There are things that are difficult to figure. Well, did this happen at this point in time? Yes, but the plot is not, it's not confusing. The second time you watch it, there are things that you're going to pick up on, and you're going to say, oh, wait a minute, that's actually pretty straightforward. I missed that. And this is where, when you make a movie like this, we don't realize that this is constructed like a puzzle that we're supposed to take apart and put back together. So Angel Heart only grossed somewhere between $17 and $20 million. Now, if it had been a small budget, that's okay for 1987, but it cost a decent amount to produce. I don't have the exact numbers memorized. And it didn't hit with critics the way those people who made all of the predictions that I mentioned, it didn't hit the way it hit for them. And one of the things that, and this is a positive of the home video era, VHS era, is that there are films that would otherwise, it would have taken longer for them to be rediscovered. See, I feel that a truly great film will always find a way to have an audience. May not become a cult classic in the manner of Rocky Horror Picture Show or even a Blue Velvet or, Cafe Flesh or anything like that. I just threw a little random porno at you with Cafe Flesh, but that actually did become a cult film. But Angel Heart caught fire to some extent when it hit home video. There were people such as myself. Now, I shouldn't have been able to rent it. Like, they should not have allowed a kid to rent that movie because I got to see the so-called X-rated or unrated version. It wasn't even NC-17. That hadn't happened yet. Angel Heart was one of the movies that made the MPAA go to a new rating of NC-17, although it wasn't really used very much. The film Henry and June with Fred Ward and I think Maria de Medeiros, that was the first film slapped with the NC-17. It's okay. It's nothing special. If you ever wanted to see the late Fred Ward get it on, there's a lot of that. But Angel Heart slowly gained what you might call a cult following. It's not The Big Lebowski, which we just talked about a couple of days ago. But enough people latched onto this movie, as I did, where I saw it, and I can admit the embarrassment. I only took it out because I knew that Lisa Bonet was going to get naked in this film. That's why I rented it. I didn't rent it because so-and-so said it was good, or Roger Ebert. I wasn't really that into movies where I was even watching Siskel and Ebert in that era. I rented it because, oh my God, Lisa Bonet is the most gorgeous woman in history, or words to that effect. Enough guys told me that. Okay. So I take out the movie in the fall, winter of 1987. Again, inappropriate. I don't even know if I had turned 14 yet. and I fast forward to the sex scene. I wasn't even interested in watching the movie, but I fast forwarded to the sex scene. And it's not very sexy. It's very disturbing and potentially traumatizing just to watch that sex scene. And after the movie's over, it's even worse. Mild spoiler, it's even worse. But I saw this, and yeah, she looks unbelievable. There's a moment where she has like a t-shirt on and like a little bit of a wet t-shirt action. She just looks she's an insanely attractive person. Most people would agree. But there was something in that sex scene that didn't make sense to me. And I said, well, I don't get it. I don't get why all of this other nonsense is going on. They're starting to have sex, and then there's all of this other stuff happening. There's blood everywhere. And maybe I need to actually watch this movie for this scene to make sense. Like, I had a reaction like a burgeoning film buff, like somebody who really loved movies, and that I was selling myself short by not taking this film out for the right reason. I mean, you could say you could take it out for a hot girl too, but I should have watched the fucking movie. So I didn't see anything after that, but I said, you know what, let me rewind the tape to the beginning, and let's just watch the movie, and then that sex scene will make more sense. So I did that, and I watched the film in one shot, and right away it was one of the 2 or 3 best movies I'd ever seen. At that point in my life, I think that I would have had Chariots of Fire, which is still my favorite film, first, and maybe Back to the Future, maybe Ghostbusters, maybe, Robert Redford, The Natural, but Angel Heart would have slotted right in there. And I told everybody I knew, word of mouth, you've got to see this movie. You've got to see this movie. Well, what's it about? I don't even know what it's about. It's about a private investigator trying to find a missing lounge singer, but it seems like it's about a lot more than just that. And it feels like one movie, and it becomes something else, and I for sure have never seen anything like it. I hadn't seen Blue Velvet at this point. I should bring that up. So I knew some people who picked it up, who liked it, other people who didn't. But by the time I got to film school, by the time I got to New York University, some 7 years later, 6, 7 years later, there had already been a bit of a critical reappraisal, not to the extent of now. You're not going to find anyone watching this film for the first time now who does not give it a rave. You won't find anybody. You go on YouTube, you check out the movie reactors, you look at reviews. The Rotten Tomatoes score is now in the 80s. If there had been a Rotten Tomatoes when this film was released, I don't even think it would have been fresh. People just whiffed on it. They just didn't get it. And there are certain films that are, challenging, difficult movies that have very, very out there, holy shit, are we really going here stuff. And Angel Heart is one of those. It is one of those movies. And I wrote about the film twice. It's a weird thing to say that there is a level of vindication that everybody now who sees this movie loves this movie, but it's there. And in the smallest possible way, but something that's real and tangible, I like to think that people such as myself, who wrote essays championing this film in the mid-90s, talking about how there's nothing else like it. The cinematography is incredible, the costume design, the production design, the performances. Trevor Jones's musical score, where the fuck was his Oscar nomination? His musical score is incredible. He also did big movies like, I think he did Last of the Mohicans. Like, he was not just a guy with a one-off. Trevor Jones was a multiple Oscar-nominated composer. I guess, you know what, John Williams got a nomination for The Witches of Eastwick, which probably should have won. But Trevor Jones's musical score is one of the best, different, distinctive musical scores ever. It does not sound like any other score that you've heard. It's as weird and out there as Jerry Goldsmith's score for Seconds. You ain't never heard anything like Jerry Goldsmith's score for Seconds. And there is nothing like Trevor Jones's main theme to Angel Heart. So the fact that it was already somewhat part of the canon, that this is a really interesting neo-noir, horror film, period piece. As more time went on, more people embraced it. And the fact that an idea that somebody like me wrote essays putting this film on a pedestal and urging others who had seen it, no, this deserves a reappraisal. If you think this film is all style, no substance, you didn't see it. You weren't paying attention. You know, I wasn't afraid of insulting people. I would do that in essays. But, you know, it didn't hurt me. But the idea that this film, which I had loved and at times felt like a lone voice in the wilderness, has been embraced, and it's one of Christopher Nolan's favorite horror films. I mean, he would have put Alan Parker certainly in his top 10 favorite living directors when Alan Parker was still around. So unfortunately, he wasn't really that old when he died. He died about 6 years ago. But it's one of Christopher Nolan's favorite horror films, and it is a highly influential movie, and there are young people seeing it now, pointing out the other horror films they have seen where it feels like they just stole from Angel Heart, because we know that Angel Heart was made before. But without any, big spoilers, movies that took elements from Angel Heart. Fight Club, for sure. The Sixth Sense, for sure. The Others, for sure. Shutter Island, for sure. That's a lot of movies, and there's more out there. And some of the reactors who've seen it, not that many of the main channels have watched it, but they point out, yeah, they kind of did this in this movie and they did that in the other movie. So right now, Angel Heart is streaming on, I think it's been on Pluto for a couple of years. You don't want to watch it on Pluto. It just chopped up with commercials. And this is the kind of film, and it's a concept, I mentioned Scorsese, where people talked about how Taxi Driver is not a movie that you should ever have watched on network television, because you almost have to let yourself be absorbed in the story where there aren't any commercials, and let the atmosphere, that's one of the things with Angel Heart, the atmosphere. When it's Brooklyn and wintry, we feel the chill in our bones. When it's 50-mile-an-hour winds, and it's probably not as cold, but Mickey Rourke is freezing his ass off at Coney Island, really the last light moment of the movie. But then when we move to New Orleans, and it feels like it's 100 degrees, that's something that Nolan talked about. The way that you can feel the atmosphere in this movie, you can feel it as if it's another character. So Angel Heart is streaming on the app called Canopy, and that's the app where if you have a library card, you can log in and you can watch like 10 movies a month without any charge. I don't believe there are any commercials. It's also on the free app called Hoopla, and yeah, you can rent it on Amazon Prime or Apple, but you should always exhaust all options, all free options, before opting to go with paying for something. And I understand, well, it's only $3, but if you don't have to pay the $3, don't pay the $3. So yeah, I love the performances in this film. I had an episode where I focused on Mickey Rourke's performance and how I think it's certainly the most underrated performance of his career, but just a massively underrated performance in general. A masterclass by Mickey, who was really peaking at the time. And Brad Pitt, when he was on, I forgot which podcast, but Brad Pitt talked about how big of a fan he was of Angel Heart and Mickey's performance in particular, and how many really great roles he had in the 80s. And Joe Rogan, of all people, he also was a big fan of that movie. He talks about it on occasion. You can Google and see some of the times that he's mentioned it on his podcast. He says, man, I love that movie. I love that movie. But yeah, that's really what I wanted to talk about. De Niro's turn as Louis Cypher. The first time seeing the movie, I didn't really appreciate the genius of his performance, but it's there. It's certainly his most undersold great supporting performance, in my opinion. And again, in a different year, if the film had hit different and gotten the kind of acclaim that it would get now, you could have maybe seen a supporting actor nomination for Bobby D. But he was also doing so much great work. His supporting role in Terry Gilliam's Brazil, and then his lead role in Roland Joffe's The Mission, which a lot of people just absolutely love. And not long after Angel Heart, you had Midnight Run with his buddy Charles Grodin, and that might be the best buddy movie ever made. But Alan Parker went from Angel Heart to Mississippi Burning, which many people consider to be his finest achievement. I'm still going to put Angel Heart as his number one, but Mississippi Burning, a great film, and what an amazing performances he got, not only out of Gene Hackman, but also Willem Dafoe, who, that's another guy who never missed. Willem Dafoe just never missed. But yeah, Angel Heart, 39 years old today. Lethal Weapon, 39 years old today. But Angel Heart, my single favorite horror movie of all time, and a film that younger me feels vindicated for having championing before it was cool. I'll spare you the exaggerated wrap-up, and I hope you all have a great rest of your Friday night, and I'll see you real soon. Peace.